I want to know how you started Warren's first community garden, and I'd also like to know how you became the founder of the Community Concerned Citizens. How did those two come about?
Well, I had an electrician here, and he was putting up some ceiling fans for me. And I got to talking to him about these houses that they were putting up in Warren. What was the name of those houses? White, yeah.
Sunshine houses.
Sunshine. And I got to fussing with the electrician about the sunshine house. I'm laughing because he said, "Don't be fussing with me, because I've had enough of it." He says, "You should be fussing with, you should be talking to Eleanor Williamson, because she's fussing about the same thing." Who is Eleanor Williamson? He says, "Do you know that Dr. Love's house down on Hoyt and Highland Avenue?" I said, "Yeah."
And who was Dr. Love?
Dr. Love was a black doctor at Warren. He lived on Highland, on the corner of Highland and Hoyt. He said, "She lived in Dr. Love's old house." And what her name? And he gave it to me, I wrote it down. I knew where the house was. I went down there and I knocked on the door. Eleanor was not at home, and her daughter was there. And what's your name? I told him. She doesn't know you. I said, "I don't know her either. But what you want with her?" She's very, very, I was afraid of her, and I just went ahead and told her what I want. "But she's not here, and I tell her to call you." I gave her my number, and so she called me, and we got to talking on the telephone about it. Well, we got to meet each other, and so we met each other and we talked about it. She said, "You get some people, and I'll get some people, and let's have a meeting." And so we had that meeting, and I chaired the meeting, and I talked to these people that we had hired, because we talked to them on the phone to get them to come to the meeting anyway. And so we established it. I came up with the name. Matter of fact, with me, I guess being the person that I am, I come up with the name and everything else.
And that name again is?
The Community Concerned Citizens. That was the name of it then. It wasn't until I applied for
The nonprofit?
the nonprofit thing with the state, and they told me that I couldn't have that name, Community Concerned Citizen. There was already a name, Community Concerned Citizens, around about Cincinnati. And I said, "Well, we're not going to give up this name, because I'm afraid if I take it back to the group, they'll choose something else. It wasn't a name that I wanted."
Right.
So he told me, he says, "Well, we can call you Community Concerned Citizens 2.
I always wondered where that 2 came from.
Mm-hmm. There's 2 Community Concerned Citizens in the state of Ohio. Okay. And so I said, we can go with 2, just so long as we keep Community Concerned Citizens. And so we got our certification, and we went on from there, and we were successful. We had been organized quite a long time when David Ruffin come up with Miss Franklin, I was still president. Right? You know what we ought to do? What? We ought to have a community garden. I said, it's true. And I told him, I says, when I was 17 years old, that's what it was. And I lived in the Benton Homes. And this was a wartime thing when I living in the Benton home, that people should raise their own garden. I was a teenager, and here again, they didn't want me. That kid didn't want to do nothing but come out there and mess up. And everybody, mostly that had gardens out there, the home office had plowed up a big area, and everybody had their own plot. And I guess being a kid, I worried them people to death.
I'm sure my grandparents had a plot out there.
I kept on every day, and while those men folks was out there, and they were running me home and all that kind of stuff, and I'd go back every day. And they told Mr. Tolles about me, and that he knew about me in the first place.
Now, who was Mr. Tolles?
He was the manager of Benton Homes. And
is he the one that gave all the streets their names? I heard he was the one who decided what streets would have a particular name, and that he named them after famous black people, like Douglas Drive after Frederick Douglass, Addicts after...
I do not know where the streets they got their name. We lived on we lived on Hamilton.
All right.
And finally, they gave me a plot.
Okay.
I was out there working just like they were working and whatnot. And they were astonished with me working, because my garden, I was out there all the time. My garden turned out to be better than some of the men that was out there, weeds and all, but I was always out there.
So the ladies didn't tend to the garden that much? They probably had to take care of the kids, huh?
I don't know why they wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
But being a teenager, I wasn't worried about them ladies.
Right. I understand. I was just curious myself as to why it was mostly men and not ladies.
Don't ask me
The ladies were probably taking care of the kids.
Well, don't ask me no whys and what and this and that and the other. But anyway, my garden was... And so after I went back to school, this was like 11th grade, I went back to school and I told... Wells is his last name, James Wells. About we talked about what we were doing, and this was pretty near the time that we were making out our schedule for the next year. He said, you know what? He said, you ought to take horticulture. Horticulture? What's horticulture? You know, I'm young. I hadn't been through any horticulture before. And so he said, yeah. He says, it's the Swartz class. So even in high school, I didn't hear Mr. Swartz. And so I put that down on my, you know how you went to high school out there, Warren Public Schools. And Mr. Swartz. And I went up there. You have to take your thing to the class, and the teacher had to sign it. I
remember that.
And so Mr. Swartz, he took my class, took me in one of his class, and the time that he had open. I went in that class. He was astonished himself how I worked in gardening. And so anyway, that was my first year. And so when I got the second year, 12th grade, I took it again. Only A I ever got on my
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
You must have, that was your passion, huh? You really loved it.
Mm-hmm. So I told David, I says, you know, I've been wanting to start David Ruffin. I said, I've been wanting to start one of these. David says, yeah. He said, there's a lot of empty lots all over Warren. He said, we can have garden here and there and everywhere. I said, no, David. I have a way about myself when I see something a little bit more fruitful than running here and there. But you know, you're going to have water, ask the city for water all over town, and they're not going to give it to us. And he said, yeah, what you got in mind? I said, let's take one of these school yards and develop something that, I said, advertise it and see how many people is interested and whatnot. He said, well, if you think that's going to work, he said, you do that. And I went ahead on and did it. I called all of these people together. Our first meeting was, and this minister helped us to have our first meeting at his place.
Mm-hmm.
His church was Reverend Monument of Faith. What is his name?
Oh, David Heron?
Heron, Reverend Heron.
I just saw him before I came here.
He let us have a place in his new building.
Mm-hmm.
And they said chairs out there in the vestibule.
Oh, okay.
And I bet you there was more than 20 people there.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the beginning of the community garden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. David Heron. How we got him? Oh, I know. It was advertised in the newspaper. Our first meeting, it wasn't our very first meeting. Our first meeting was at Scope. That's where I called. And I bet you maybe about 10 or 12 people. And then the second meeting was at Reverend Heron's.
So Warren City Schools said, no problem, you can have this property in back of Horseman.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of my elementary schools.
I wrote a letter to them.
Mm-hmm.
And did I write a letter or did I make an appointment? I'm not sure which one I did.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they said yes. And so I called a meeting. No, I didn't know what I was doing. This is the thing. I said, I'm going to call Ohio State
I know what you're talking about.
Agriculture.
Right. Mm-hmm. Extension.
Extension. Mm-hmm. And I called up there and asked them if they had a person that could help me and show me how to do
A community garden.
community garden.
Oh, okay.
And so the reception said, well, yes, we have one of the directors who's not in now to call you. I bet you it wasn't 15, 20 minutes before I got that call. This man was so interested in getting this community. He says, well, let's have a meeting. And then we picked the date and whatnot. And I got people from everywhere.
Well, you know, one of the
And
one of the most impressive things that I've seen since moving back here, and I was a part of the community garden. I even had one for a couple years. But when the president of the Ohio State University came to your community garden, now that was impressive.
he sent me a letter.
That was very impressive.
And he sent me a letter after that and complimenting me on it. It was pretty much a letter like a certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he was here, and he was so impressed. To tell you somebody else, he didn't come, but he sent somebody else, Tim Ryan.
Oh, okay.
He sent a representative over there when we had we had all kind of visitors and outings and stuff like that.